Hi everyone, it's Anne. Welcome back to Art on the Creek. It is Saturday, which means it's time to review. Today I thought we would look at a set of watercolor markers. We're going to look at the Karin Brushmarker Pros. Are you ready? Let's get to it. First of all, I wanted to open with a negative. I know, I'm sorry about that. But the one I want to talk about first are the DecoBrush metallic markers by Karin. Now, I got these because I was making a lot of cards at the time. I've only had these for 2 years. I have stored them horizontally as directed. I have made sure that the lids are snapped on securely, but they're losing their metallic properties over the years. The blue is barely metallic at all. The purple, same, and it's starting to dry out. So that's kind of a bummer. The gold has a sheen to it, but it's not metallic. It's not as metallic as they were when I first got them. They used to be really metallic, like they looked really cool. That's what really drew me to them. The light green, same thing. It has a sheen, but it's not really metallic. The silver still looks good. That still looks just like it did when it was original. But here on this next one, the green, this is what I mean by the metallic. It had a color shift. It was so bright and so metallic, and it was really fun to use on Christmas cards. And for 1 year, I had a great time making cards. This one just looks like a sheer brown. That's a copper. And then this is a darker gold. It used to be a bronze. It's just kind of another sheer brown. The black still looks good. You can see that it has that color shift to it. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to say no on the DecoBrush metallic markers, especially the pink one. It's my favorite color, and it's really just hasn't held up at all. Something's wrong with it. Let me just scoot all of this stuff aside here, and you can see how weird this marker is. Now, maybe I can fix it. I don't know. Let's take a look at the cartridge here, and I'll show you, see if you can see there. It's kind of leaking out on the inside, and it looks to me like all of the metallic properties have just kind of congregated into one part of it. I don't know, but it does not look like a good marker. This marker, it feels rough. It feels like a dead marker, and that color is just not good. You just don't have the kind of payout that you'd expect from a Karin marker. So that's really disappointing because that's my favorite color. If I can't get that pink marker fixed, I think I do want to try contacting the company because, you know, individually these are $3.99. For the set of 10, it runs about $32.99, so you do save a little bit of money that way. But, you know, that's not cheap. That's almost $35 for a set of markers that isn't going to do as it's promised. I don't think is a really good investment, but I'll contact the company and see what they say. The metallic ones, they claim that they're permanent, light, fast, and waterproof on surfaces such as paper, wood, ceramics, glass, metal, and plastic. So that's what really drew me to the metallics. But now we're going to get into these ones that I really do like. These are the Brushmarker Pros. Now, Karin's a good company. They make these markers very well. They use Japanese nibs on all of them, including the metallics. And just look at the vibrant color payout on these. Now, I'm using 100% rag B cotton cold press paper. And I'm just going to go through and do a little rainbow here for you so that you can kind of see. Now, if you are a crafter and you're using these for stamping, for coloring in your stamps, you won't have any trouble at all. If you're into cartooning or manga style art, there's a lot of really great character colors in here. There's a huge variety of skin tones that you can use and blend, and they can work exactly like a watercolor palette. You get a lot of color payout. They're intense colors because they are dye-based. I'll read to you a little bit from their website here. The Brushmarker Pro markers are water-based, non-toxic markers with a brush-like tip, and those tips are the Japanese super durable, flexible nylon tips. And it's my knowledge that those kind of tend to be the ones that artists talk about the most. Those are the ones that tend to be the most revered in the industry, are the Japanese nibs. As I'm talking here, let me just go over what I'm demonstrating. I have a sheet of 6" by 9" 100% cotton rag cold press B watercolor paper. And what I've done is just kind of block in some colors there, just making a little rainbow. And I'm using a Princeton Snap, which is a nylon filament brush, to blend this rainbow and show you exactly what kind of color payout you can get. So they act completely like the die marker that they are. So if you're looking for a dye-based watercolor marker, I would definitely consider these Karin Brushmarker Pros. Their claims are all true about these that I found so far. And again, I've had these for probably 3 years and they are still acting like brand new markers. Now I don't use them that often, but when I do, the payout is 100% as it was when they were new. They're selling these a little bit differently than they did when I bought my set. Now I, for some reason, have ended up with this random amount of 4 colorless blenders. I think I got some in an art kit because I also have some duplicates, but I did get the full set at the time. Now they offer a 72-piece set, a 60, a 26, and then there's also neons, which I don't have, the 12-piece neon. And then for the earth tones and other colors, they have created this kind of they've got curated palettes. Like for instance, you can get a set of just grays, or you can get a skin set, they call it, a flowers set, a sky set. So they do have some that are curated. They've also got a sun and tree set. That's kind of the one that's for naturals. They have a basic color. Those are all sets of 12s, all their curator sets. So, you know, there's a lot of versatility here. And here you can see another way to use these markers. I found that using a white ceramic palette is the best way to do this particular method, because you can really see how much you've got to work with, and you can see the color very clearly on white. So far these are pretty versatile, right? You can color with them, blend what you've colored, or you can use them like traditional watercolors just by coloring the pigment down into a palette and then painting it on. I think this one, yeah, I had my brush a little bit dirty there. So let's do that green one more time so that you can see how clearly this color goes down. There we go. Now that the brush is clean, I can show you this. So you see, it's nice, bright, sheer color. Now, if you're not too familiar with watercolor, this probably won't jump out at you, but I see dye-based inks. Anything that is that vibrant and that bright is typically dye-based, which is fine. It just means it's not going to be light fast, and they don't claim it to be. So you know exactly what you're getting. Here's another fun technique that you can do with some saran wrap or plastic wrap. All you have to do is tear off a little piece, and then let's get some fun colors and see how this part works. I've grabbed one of the bright pinks here. I think it's the cerise, and we'll go ahead and color on that plastic just a little bit. And now we'll go in with a purple and color right next to that. And now I'll go in with a different one. I think this is the magenta that I chose. So just putting 3 colors down on the saran wrap, and it shifted a little bit there, but that's okay. And now we'll come in with a spray bottle. This is just pure water. Just going to put a few drops of water down there. If you don't have a spray bottle, you can just use your fingers and sprinkle some water on it. And I think let's get a clean sheet of watercolor paper. Here we go. This is a really fun craft to do with kids. I know this is nothing new. I know that you guys have probably seen this, you know, before. The stampers have been doing this forever, but I still love this technique. I love putting markers down on some kind of plastic, getting it wet, and then picking up the ink with watercolor paper, because it just kind of looks like a tie-dye design. It just creates that great wash. And you know, I chose 3 colors. You can do any colors you like. You can do whatever you want on these. When I said it's good for kids, it really is good for all ages. It's a fun thing. If you've got some senior citizens that you're working with, this is a really good one to use for them too. And with the Karin markers, the payout cov, the color is just so vibrant, so it makes it a lot of fun, and the blending is almost effortless. Let's look at some tonal transitions. Let's try that with apple green and magenta. So same thing, the points are really great. I've got the color swatches down here. Let's try, we'll just hold them together for a little bit. I'm just kind of rolling them like so. And we'll try the green first. So you can see, if you are one to do calligraphy or a lot of lettering, I'm not one of those people, but if you are one of those people, you can really get some neat effects with a couple of colors. It doesn't show up as much on the darker color that you use to blend, but it does show up. It's just you get more bang for your buck if you're going to use this tonal transitions on the lighter color. I found a really cute picture on Pixabay. This was a duck. He's a mallard. He just looked so incredibly sassy. And I just wanted to see if what we could come up with these markers working on a duck here. Let me clean out my palette just in case we decide to mix. Now for my purposes, this is the ultimate test for a watercolor marker. Like I've said before, these are not light fast at all. So this is something that you would want to do just to play with or keep in your sketchbook. We're also going to use a little bit of white gel marker at the end. And once again, I'm using that Princeton Snap brush. What I like to do for these is I like to go ahead and swatch them out ahead of time so I can decide in advance which colors I want to use. The grays, you can see there I've got warm, cool, and neutral, and then they gradiate them in levels of 1, 2, and 3 going down. That's in the upper right-hand corner of my swatch paper there. There is like hardly any difference between those. I don't know if it's because my markers have aged, but yeah, I didn't see any difference between the warm, cool, and neutral gray. But I did find a good range of colors, I think, for our mallard. So let's go ahead and get started on that. This section is going to be double speed because I just want to talk about how these feel and how they perform. I did see in the reference photo, I did see just a little bit of pink to start with. So I wanted to make sure and do a wet and wet technique. So I thought, what the heck, I'll go down and start with this pink. And then I'm just going to wet his entire face with that pink. And I believe it is that cerise that I was using before. Now I've got some of that lush green, and this is wet on wet. And this was fun. I was really having a good time. So these spread almost as much as core watercolors. I have found that when you're using dye-based markers, they kind of, or dye-based paints rather, they really do have a little bit more flow to them. It's probably something in the manufacturer, but yeah, it was just really fun to do, especially wet on wet, to see these colors blend like that. It was really kind of cool. This is the sapphire blue that I'm going in for the front of his face. And then I'll just continue to manipulate these shades and try and get it just right. So let me move on to the next section. And this is not a tutorial on how to paint a duck, although I did like the way he came out. But I would say if you're really going to be a watercolor artist, stick with watercolor, stick with the traditional watercolor, because this did have its frustrations. I think this best use for these Brushmarker Pros are on very small subjects. My paper is 6 inches by 9 inches, but I felt like I was always racing to get enough pigment down in my ceramic dish. You can only lay so much color down on your ceramic surface, and then I feel like if you continue to go over that area in layers, you're actually just absorbing the color back up into the nib because the ceramic isn't absorbent at all, so the color has nowhere to go. What I could have done is use a larger ceramic plate. The palette I have here obviously has very small wells, so that could have been a limiting factor. So what I thought I would try with the rest of his bill here on our left side, his right side, is to go in with the gold marker and just kind of fill in the pigment in a few key points, and then I'll blend this with a wet brush. Now, typically, this doesn't work. You always end up with some kind of marker line behind, and I don't like it. It just doesn't work. However, you can see what happened here was it kind of worked out okay. Now, I don't know if it's because the pigments were so close together or if I just put down exactly the right amount of pigment or I caught it soon enough in the blend, but for whatever reason, that little technique worked just then. So now I think I'll put some sandstone in on the shady side of the beak here, and let's check back in at the next portion. I wanted to try a different technique on the body. Now you see I've got the beak a little more finessed. I went in there with some black and added some detail. So with the body, the technique that I wanted to try was just pulling the pigment from the palette and then painting it wet on dry. It doesn't work as well. I think the most success that I had was with the face, and that was where, remember, we did the wet on wet technique. I was able to get a real smooth blend. I love how the colors are able to play with each other and show through on the surface, and you'll see when, at the end, when I have a few more blends in there, it just really came out smooth and beautiful. This method, I was just trying everything I could think of to do it a different way. I was trying to find the worst ways to do this because I felt like the head went really well. And now I wanted to see what it was like if you just put the pigment down and tried to blend it. And I was frustrated, no surprise. I kind of knew that I would be. I've never been happy using markers where when you put them down and then get a brush to blend it out. I just don't like the way it looks. I mean, if you can get it to work and it works great for you, great, keep keep doing it. But I had high hopes for these Karin markers. I thought, well, they're so juicy. There's so much pigment coming out of these beautiful nibs. Maybe this will work. And yeah, it worked okay. I had to go in with an awful lot of layers. And that's the thing that, to me, as a watercolor artist, I'm never too thrilled with, because you always risk overworking. On the plus side, this didn't come out overworked. So let's move ahead to the next section, and I'll show you how I did that. If you've watched my channel for any length of time, you'll know that one of my absolute favorite techniques to use is dry brush technique. So I decided I would try that with this, and you know what? I really like the way it turned out. I went in with the black to do the feathers on the area between his eyes, and I had hardly any pigment on my brush, and I just went in there lightly with some dry brush technique, and success. So that is a big plus with these markers. You're able to do a lot of different techniques. So now here I'm going in with a subsequent glaze, and you can see how beautifully it lays down. I really like the transparency of these. I like how easy they are to use once you get them in the palette. The cons would be the amount of pigment that you can put down. And again, that's easily resolved. I think if next time I were to do this, I would definitely use a big flat palette that's white, like a butcher tray or a big white ceramic plate. So let's go in and do the eye here real quickly so you can see when you're working in detail. Once again, super simple, works very much like regular watercolor, and that black goes down really nicely. I'm really liking the black, and I'm also liking that you can make it really sheer. So let's go in with a grainer brush and some of that black and see if we can get some feather details on his chest. I was impressed. This worked well also. I had to remember to get the brush pretty wet though to pick up some of the pigment, because at first it just wasn't making an impact at all. But I was very pleased that you can also use a grainer brush with these and have no problem whatsoever. And then there were the grays. Honestly, I think if these grays still had some real differentiation between them as far as the warm, the cool, and the neutral goes, as I showed you in the little sample palette, I can't see any difference at all between the warm, cool, and neutral. Maybe you guys are watching this on your monitor and you're saying, and it's so obvious, it's right there. But to my naked eye, it's just, they all look the same. So I went in with the neutral gray. I'm trying to do wet on wet again. I really like how loose this looks. So let's see if we can get some feather details in there. I always dried each layer before I went in with the next, because I didn't want to go with new pigment on wet pigment unless I was working on the head. So with everything after the head, I really did wet on dry. And I'm just kind of using that neutral gray number 3 to get these shadows for the feathers in, and I was so disappointed in the blend. I thought that it would really soften those edges and get it to look really subtle, but it didn't. So I continued to be frustrated with the performance of this throughout, but let's skip ahead a little bit and I'll show you how I fixed everything. After drawing that, and after I think 2 more layers of trying to get some color in, I finally went in with the black. And I decided that that was going to be the best way to fix it, because I felt like what it was missing were the appropriate amount of shadows. So what I did here was I went in and kind of tapped around, kind of using a little dot technique or little hash marks to just kind of try and get some shading in there. And then because I knew that the black was a really good performer, I would almost recommend, if you're going to use these for watercolor like I did here today, test every pen that you're going to use. Swatch it all out. I knew ahead of time that those grays weren't blending very well, because you saw on the sample card there, they just didn't have a lot of payout. I'll put a little picture up here on the right hand side so you can see what I'm talking about. All of the grays are in the upper right hand corner of that swatch sheet that I did. Not only do they all kind of look the same, but you can see when I added water to them, a lot of hard lines remain visible. I didn't get a lot of blending at all. But then if you go over to the left-hand side and look at the lush green and the ochre, even the olive black, the gold, really nice blends. And by testing those colors ahead of time, you'll know which method works the best for what type of technique you want to use. For instance, with all of those grays, you just aren't going to get a lot of blending happening. It just doesn't happen if you color on the paper and then try and blend it with water. With the ochre, the lush green, the cerise, even the sapphire blue, the black and the gold, those ended up doing pretty well for blends on the paper. The browns also did pretty well, but the grays just didn't perform at all. So that's something you want to know ahead of time. Overall, though, for using these Karin Brushmarker Pros, if you're going to use them for card making or for calligraphy, perfect. They even say graphic design and illustration on the pen, and those are the manga kind of arts that I mentioned before. If you like to draw superheroes or characters, anything like that, I think these would be an amazing, amazing asset to your art supplies. But for me, for myself, I think that they're just a lot of fun. They're kind of a novelty. For all of the markers out there, I am thrilled with the payout of the color. Not thrilled with the dye-based situation, not thrilled that they're not light fast, but that's okay. You know, not every supply I have is light fast, and I don't hang all of my work. This duck can certainly rest in my art album and be perfectly happy, although I'll probably put them on the wall for a little bit. So yeah, I like how the background worked here. I was able to continue doing a wet on dry, but I'm picking up the previous layer, so I'm able to merge all of these similar shades of green really well. And I did end up going back and doing a second layer of this. So let's skip forward to the highlights and you can see the finished product. Once I got a second layer on the background, I felt that his face needed another little wash, so we went ahead and did that. I'm going in with a white gel pen just to add these final highlights here. And there's, you know, if I were to do this over watercolor, sometimes it makes the gel pen not work really well. That was a non-issue here, so that's another plus to this. If you wanted to draw whatever it is you're drawing with these markers and then go over it with a gel pen for highlights, you will have no issues whatsoever. I did notice as I was doing the neck feathers that it kind of loosened up the pigment underneath a little bit. So definitely be aware of that. You know, these Karin markers are going to reactivate very easily. Overall, I think I would give these a 9 out of 10 just because the pigmentation is so vibrant. Now, that's also kind of a sacrifice because with that dye base, you're not getting the light fastness. But if light fastness is something that matters to you, then definitely consider the Faber-Castell Au Recteur watercolor markers, or take a look at the Winsor & Newton professional watercolor markers. Those also will give you more leeway because they have a dual tip. These get points because they've got that great Japanese brush tip. The ink flows flawlessly all the time, and they're great from the get-go. Again, not thrilled with the metallics though, so buy those at your own risk. But for the Karin Brush Pro markers, guys, I think it would be a great investment. Thanks so much for joining me again today, guys, on this Saturday review day. I hope that maybe if you hadn't considered using watercolor markers, maybe now you will. And if you're looking for something that you're not going to sell or light fastness is not a concern to you, then these Brushmarker Pros are really good performers for their price point. Thanks so much once again. I hope everybody has a great weekend, and we'll see you on Wednesday with the next watercolor lesson. We'll see you next week with the next review. Take care, everyone. Have a really great day. Bye now.